Hello and welcome to NARC Live on Wednesday the 6th of November 2024. Coming to you live from Norfolk on the east coast of England with Tammy M0TC.
Hello.
And me, David G70RP. Lovely to see you. On tonight's show, Steve K1RF live from the US with a presentation on Dipoles and Doublets. We have club and members news and views. And we find out what on earth this is. Yep, we've had quite a few entries, but if you think you know and you want to drop it down on BATC or on Facebook, very shortly we'll read your answer in with the other answers as well. So just a bit of club news really this week. Again, I'm going to advertise the Christmas dinner, which is arranged for Wednesday the 18th of December at the Village Inn, just south of Norwich. And it starts at 18:45 for dinner starting at 19:30, and it's a 3-course meal subsidised by the club, a real choice of lots of different foods, and it's only £15. The only other thing you'll need to buy on the night are drinks. So it's in the usual place. We've been holding it the last few years and everybody seems to like it, so I literally haven't heard anybody against it.
And raffle tickets as well.
Oh, raffle tickets. Good, thank you.
Don't forget about raffle tickets.
The Secret Santa sort of raffle. What we do ask is, it's optional, but what we do ask you is if you can bring a small gift wrapped up, then we do have a raffle on the night, and that is our last fundraising activity for the club's charity, which this year is prostate cancer, as voted for by you, the membership, at our AGM in April. So that's also part of that evening. It makes it a nice fun way to end it as well. So the deadline for booking is Wednesday the 27th of November. And yep, I know we've only just started November, but already there's been 3 weeks since we've been taking these in. Only about 20 people have booked so far. So, and we'd like to, obviously quite a few more than that. I normally would, but please book it as soon as possible. That does help me as well, really. Thank you. Now, something else that we talked about at the Members Forum this year, which was just after our AGM, was possible visits. And one of the visits that you wanted was the Hamfest. Of course, we've had that. But also, there was a request for a coach trip to be arranged for Bletchley Park and the National Radio Centre, which is also at Bletchley Park. Really, really worthwhile place to see. But people asked us if we could arrange a coach trip. So I've put out an appeal on the newsletter for anybody interested in that trip to let me know. And the reason I need this is because to come up with a price, when you book a coach, it's all about how many people go, and the more people that go, of course, the less it is. So to be able to get the price right and make sure it's viable, I need to get find out who's interested. So please do let me know if you are interested in going on a coach trip. There's no more than that. There's no obligation. I shan't come after you if you can't suddenly make it, because we obviously haven't set a date and everything else yet. It'll probably be in the new year though now. Then please drop me an email, radio@dcpmicro.com. And I think the deadline for that is next Wednesday. So please do let me know if you'd like us to arrange one. And then when I've got the numbers, I can then come up with a price. Finally, 2025 isn't that far away. I know it's terrible to say that. But it does mean as well from November, the club also starts to take subscriptions. And I'm pleased to announce that again this year, we're able to hold our subscription at just £10 a year per person. This, as I've said before, is lower than it ever has been in my memory of the club, and I've been a member for well over 20 years. And it's pretty cheap for a club that meets every Wednesday night, either online or in person. And it's only possible, frankly, because so many of you have joined. Even many of you watching this now, I know won't be in this area, won't be in Norfolk maybe, and hardly ever come to the club or anything, but you join because you want to support it. And that's great, because that keeps the membership down for everybody, which is really important. So it's just £10 a year. If you are already a member, then you can just simply go to the bank details that you had last time, although Tammy's got a slide actually here thinking about it. Here, we can show you this now. It's the same as it has been for many years, our bank. You could just pay them £10, put your name and surname and call sign as the bank reference, and pay £10. If you're paying more than one for one person, please make sure that you make it clear on the call signs that you're paying for. If you have not joined, and if you want to join for 2025, you can also do it from now. It will cover you as well. So if you rejoin now, then you can do that. But you will need to download a membership form, which is on our website, and then send that to us so that we've got all your details. We're not allowed to keep details after a few months because of a thing called GDPR. So if you're a member already, all we need is your £10. You can start paying for next year's subs from now. All the details will be in the newsletter. And you'll also be able to pay, obviously, in person at the CNS meetings that we have as well. Just one piece of members news this week, but really some wonderful, wonderful pictures. These come from Bob, G6PWS, and these are of the Aurora, but from 3 different parts in the world. So these first 3 pictures are from Australia.
Perth, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's from Kennedy Bay, just south of Perth. And that was those 3. And then the next, and then the next 2 are from Sandridge. Look at the colours, they are. To get them in this country as well. This was in this country, and that is wonderful. A little bit of blue there you can see. And then finally this one from Bob's sister. Look at this, in Lochinver in Scotland. Now that is stunning. It's almost too good to imagine that you could see that like that.
Painting it could be, couldn't it?
Exactly that, yes. It's stunning. That is apparently the road from Ullapool to Lochinver, running past Loch Assynt. So wonderful. Thank you very much, Bob, for sharing those. I mean, I'm sure that the bookings for people to go on boats to see them in Norway and things like that probably won't be quite so busy now, because so many people will have seen it to the naked eye in this country, which is wonderful. That's all the news so far. So Tammy, over to you for some little people.
Okay, the little people this week. Have you ever wondered if there is another use for a trackpad on a laptop?
Well, I can't say I have, but...
Here we go.
Is it like a sort of griddle?
Yeah.
Is that an Apple Mac?
Yeah.
Is it yours?
No.
Ours? No. Good. Oh, look at that. That's stunning. Love the ingenuity here as always. Miniature-calendar.com. New picture every day. And Tammy picks one for us every week. Thanks, Tammy. So, a reminder as always to keep in touch with what you've been doing. You can drop us a line to radio@dcpmicro.com with your news, views, pictures, anything like that. We'd love to share them on the NARC Lives, which are roughly every alternate Wednesday. Now we're going to look at that competition that we set 2 weeks ago when we showed you this picture and asked, what on earth is this? Now,
we have had one online.
Okay, yeah, on BATC. I'll read that first so we don't miss it. Stuart G4AFF says, is the what on earth thing a device for resealing a champagne bottle?
Wow.
Okay. Right. Although you have sent us another one, as Tammy's just pointed out, Stuart. Anyway, we'll read that in a moment. So Steve G3VA says, is this week's what on earth a drink spout? Bruce G4KZT says, I think this week's what on earth is a pourer. The concertina part is pushed back into the neck of the bottle. Olive oil, for example. Olive oil, you see, is not just booze. When the cap is removed, liquid pours out of the tube. Replacing the cap keeps the contents sealed in, and it saves the glug glug noise of pouring straight from the bottle.
Nick M0HTU, I think it's a spout put in a bottle to allow you to pour oil, etc. He said oil.
Yeah. Bob G6PWS, it's a drinks pourer, a move top, push that in, take the top off, and hey, have a drink.
Mark 2E0YUU, is this week's item an olive oil drizzler spout thingy?
Now, got me worried that I've got the wrong one on earth here, but I don't think I have. So Stuart GM4AFF, who also sent us that answer online, he said it's obviously a sonic screwdriver, but one of the earlier models, he says.
It could look a bit like that, yeah.
Yeah, I can see that.
Colin M7OPB, this is a drinks dispenser. It's for giving a shot.
Andrew G0SUM, I think is a fluid dispenser for shots or cordial in bartending. Best 7-3 to all at NARC, he says.
Colin M0GMK, this week's object is a wine bottle stop and pourer. It may work with other beverages, but I'll stick with the wine.
Okay, well, Colin, you do that. Tom G8XQD, this is a pourer for spirits or cocktail mixers. You could tell the people apart, can't you, if they said if it was for oil.
Yeah.
Oh, and Tammy's pointing to me. She wants me to read this one.
It's because it's a long one.
Okay. This one just got sneaked into the time tonight. Came from Mike G8EY. Listen carefully. This week's thingy is a balanced flow fluid velocity regulator with pulse harmonic surge damping. You knew that, didn't you, Tammy?
Yeah.
You can find them in pubs where they are used to replace the screw tops or corks of beverage bottles, allowing steady, controlled, free flow dispensing without spillage or spoilage, he says. And the answer is?
The answer is, well, it is a bottle
of course
stop.
it is.
And it's finally shown there in a bottle of gin, so there we go.
By Paul G3 VPT,
Yeah.
no less. Don't have too much of that, Paul. Lovely, thank you very much. So let's see what we've got for you this time, and we'll be back in 2 weeks' time to reveal what on earth is this.
Intriguing.
I know, and I know what this is, and I would never guess it in a million years. So do you know what that is? I know some of you will start looking on the internet and things like that, but this is a picture that this person sent in. He took it himself, so I think that's tricky. Anyway, good luck. If you know what that is, have a good look at it. As always, we'll be putting it on our website and on Facebook, and you've got just under 2 weeks to let us know what you think that is. So, nearly time for our guest tonight. Just time though to talk about what's coming on at the club this week. On Saturday, it's that time of the month where we have the Koblenz Sked on 7.123 megahertz. Everyone is welcome. That's 10 o'clock on Saturday morning. Also a local talk-in on 145 250. On Sunday at 7 p.m, the GB2RS News on GB3NB repeater. On Monday night, the 7:30, we've got the Monday Night Net also on GB3NB. At 8 p.m, the CW Net on 3.543 megahertz. And then next Wednesday, a week from tonight, we'll be meeting in person at CNS School for one of the most popular days of the year there. It's a tabletop sale. And it's free to attend, it's free to buy and sell for all current paid up members. Or, as I said earlier, if you aren't a member but you'd like to come along to this, you can join the club there and then for just £10, and it will take you right through to the end of 2025 and all the other things that the club offers as well. So there we are. That's next Wednesday, the 13th of November, between 7 and 9:30. Please don't arrive before 7 p.m. And as I said earlier, just please do keep in touch with your stories and your pictures. And of course our card, which we're always happy to send. We send roughly one a week to people. It can really cheer people up. We will just add your name to ours and send it to them. Just send us their name and address and what the occasion is, or whether they just want a card to be remembered. Send it to this address, radio@dcpmicro.com. So now it's time for our main event, and our guest tonight is coming all the way from the States. He's got one of the best courses I've ever seen. It's a real welcome to Steve, K1RF. Hello, Steve.
Hi, good evening, everybody.
Lovely to see you.
Nice to be here.
I've got to ask you about that call sign. I mean, have you always had that, or is that one that you changed?
I always had that as an extra, and it was very important to me to have it sound nice on CW. That was part of the requirement for the call.
I
And
bet.
the RF is kind of nice.
Yes, lovely. Well, it's good to see you. I wouldn't be right, I think, to speak to an American today, of all days. You don't have to tell us politically about how you feel, but I mean, is it a relief to at least have got that election done with? Because I can tell you that in Britain, we have heard about as much about that election that you've just had as you have, I expect, over there. So what do you feel? Is it a sense of relief, at least it's done now and you can move on?
Exactly. I think everybody has a sense of relief over here. To put it in ham radio lingo, I'd say that Mr. Trump's speech resonated with the voters. How's that?
I think that's good. And as I wasn't prying at all on how you felt about it, but as I said, I don't remember an American election really that's been covered quite as much. It was almost as covered, in fact, to us in the UK as much as it was over with you. But anyway, thanks for sharing that with us. We're going to leave the talk with you now, Steve. You're going to talk to us about doublets and dipoles. But of course, to everybody at home, if you've got any questions or queries or suggestions or any comments at all for Steve, then do put them now onto BATC or Facebook at any time during the talk, and we'll read them to Steve at the end. But now, over to you, Steve, K1RF.
Okay, thank you. Before I begin, I'd like to just tell you a little bit about myself. I'm Steve, K1RF. I might have worked some of you before. I do get into England quite often on CW. I'm a retired double E. I've been a functional group manager that designed PC boards and FPGAs. I did some project management and program management. This was all at a Mill Aerospace company. While I was working, I had very little time for ham radio, but when I retired, which was a while ago in 2012, I had plenty of time for ham radio, and I got interested in simple wire antennas. I've always been fascinated by getting as much performance as you can with a minimum cost, and dipoles and doublets certainly fit in that category. Let me go on. This next slide came from a USA comedy TV series called Gilligan's Island. It was about a 2-hour cruise where they hit a storm and they got shipwrecked on an island. So here they're trying to contact the mainland. Just a dipole, no one will hear us, etc., etc. So I thought that it would be funnier if you were in the USA. I probably should have used a Monty Python cartoon or something. At any rate, what I want to get across in here is something more about antenna patterns. People are mostly worried about low VSWR, and the antenna pattern is very important because you may be transmitting in a direction that you didn't think you were. And that was something that this antenna expert, LB Seebeck, W4RNL, has said. This information, I tried to take the data for it from well-known sources. The main one was the American Radio Relay League antenna book. Then there were various experts. LB Seebeck, who is no longer with us, but he was very prolific in writing all kinds of antenna articles and very knowledgeable in everything you could think of there. Joel Hallis has written numerous articles. He's also no longer with us. He was the QST technical editor and wrote many articles and some books for the ARRL. Joel actually was a member of our local radio club and a few other local clubs, and he was a really nice guy. I was really sad when he was no longer with us, but his works live on. Owen Duffy, VK10D, has a blog at owenduffy.net. I call him the Mythbuster. He's quoted all the time on things that people talk about that are incorrect, and he tries to straighten them out. Steve Hunt, also no longer with us, but he's an expert on hex beams and various in-depth technical topics, and I refer to his works quite often. I also have done a lot of my own simulations using EasyNEC that some of you may have played with. It's free. He gave the professional version away for free recently, fairly recently, by Roy Llewellyn, W7EL. And there's another tool called SimNEC, written by Ward Harriman. I've corresponded with Ward quite often, as well as Owen Duffy. I would suggest if many of you haven't tried your hand at simulation, to try EasyNEC Pro. It comes with a good user manual and some example antennas. And you could play around with a simple dipole and just vary its height and look what happens to its antenna patterns. It's quite interesting. The main topics I'm going to talk about is first some introduction, some of CBIC's favorite backyard antennas, and the dipole and doublet are two of them. What's the difference between a dipole and a doublet? And how do you use a dipole for multibanding or a doublet for multibanding? And then some other related topics, feed line considerations and antenna tuner considerations. First of all, when you talk about simple wire antennas, what you select is very operation dependent. It could be used at home, which is sort of a semi-permanent installation in your garden. It's very dependent on real estate available and mounting options. What bands and modes do you want to operate, etc. Field day here in the US requires moderately quick deployment. Again, you have to worry about available mounting provisions, but you have a new problem, which is co-located multiple rigs where the antennas could be pretty close to each other and interference is an issue. So some antennas are better than others or may have some features which help co-located setups. And there's portable on the air, which needs portable lightweight type antennas with quick deployment. Summits on the air, very similar, but even lighter and more portable. And de-expeditions, which need fairly good performing antennas, where you might have a little more time available to set them up compared to POTA or SOTA. Now, let me just give you a couple of sort of interesting facts. First of all, let's start with a definition. dBi means decibels with respect to an isotropic antenna, which is a conceptual one. It doesn't really exist, but it radiates equally in all directions in a sort of spherical pattern. 3 dBi is equivalent to twice the power rating. 0 dBi is just like an isotropic antenna. 6 dBi is a 4 times power increase. 9 dBi is an 8 times power increase. So let's start by looking at a quarter wave vertical with 16 quarter wave ground radials over average ground. That's a pretty good vertical, pretty good number of ground radials. Well, that has a fairly small gain over an isotropic, only 0.22 dBi, which is a little over 1.05 increase in power. The gain of a dipole in free space is not much better. It's only 2.15 dBi, which is about a 1.64 times increase in power. But now here's where things get interesting. If you have a dipole and you mount it half wave above average ground, the gain shoots up to 7.9 dBi with about a 28-degree elevation angle. That's over 6-time improvement in power. That's quite substantial. The next increase in gain could come from a extended double ZEP antenna, which is basically a dipole or doublet, which is 1.25 wavelengths long. On 20 meters, that's 88 feet long. And at 35 feet high, you get about a 10 dBi gain over isotropic. That's an increase in power of more than 10 times, 11.2 times, in fact. Now you take a big loop, a 560-foot long horizontal loop, 70 feet high, on 20 meters. That'll give you a whopping 12.9 dBi at a 12-degree nice DX angle, DX elevation angle, or 19.5 time power improvement. So now let's look at dipole versus vertical. This is something that I simulated in EasyNEC. By the way, you can overlay antenna patterns in EasyNEC very easily. You could save a pattern, or you could import patterns and overlay them in different colors. So if a vertical has such poor gain, a little over 1 or a 1-time power gain, roughly, let's say, and a dipole mounted half wave up could give you a much higher gain, like 7 dBi. How could a vertical work at all? Well, it's all about elevation angle, and elevation angle. Many backyard dipoles are mounted too low with a near vertical incident skywave or NVIS elevation pattern. It's like a big blob. A 40-meter dipole mounted 35 feet high will lose to a vertical at elevation angles below about 17 degrees, believe it or not. This sort of pinkish elevation pattern is from a quarter wave vertical. This next dipole height above ground of a quarter wave, it looks like a blob, and the two patterns cross at about 17 degrees. So the vertical, quarter wave vertical, will outperform a quarter wave high dipole, believe it or not. But when you go up to a half wave with a dipole, you now get this pattern shown in black. And as you can see, it's way better than the quarter wave vertical. The gain is much higher. You can see a nice big fat elevation pattern compared to the rather puny vertical pattern. So getting it up to a half wave length makes it a much better performing antenna. So I wanted to just show you that this is something which is not very well known, and it even surprised me when you actually try to compare the elevation patterns of a vertical versus a dipole at different heights. Okay, let's talk about CBIC's favorite backyard multiband wire antennas in no particular order. There's something called a dipole doublet, which I'll get into what that means, a broadside doublet, fan dipoles, the horizontal oriented and polarized loop, and the inverted L. Those are his favorite backyard multiband antennas. If he had only one antenna that covered 40 through 10 meters that radiates in a known direction, he likes the 44-foot doublet. Okay, an important fact about all horizontal antennas, according to CBIC, basically any horizontal antenna has the same general phenomena that affect dipoles in terms of their height above ground. The lower your antenna is as a fraction of wavelength, the lower will be the overall gain, and the higher will be the elevation angle. A good rule of thumb for a dipole or a doublet is to try to have at least the height equal to the width of the antenna. That will give you a really good performing antenna. Now that's not very easy to do for a lot of the bands. 80 meters, you'd have to get it up 126 feet high. Almost no hams could do that. On 40 meters, it's 66 feet high. That could be done with difficulty. 20 meters, about 33 feet high. That's in the realm of what most hams are capable of doing. Then when you get on 15 meters and 10 meters, it becomes easier and easier to get a half wave of height. Dipole or doublet. When does a dipole become a doublet and vice versa? There's actually no formal difference. These are just two different names for the same antenna. However, historically, the term doublet is often applied to a symmetrical center-fed antenna that's not resonant, or it's used on multiple bands to distinguish them from a resonant center-fed dipole. But it's a matter of convention only, according to the ARRL handbook. A doublet is typically fed with open wire line or ladder line as opposed to a coax that's used with the dipole. And this ladder line could be anywhere from, say, 300 ohms to 600 ohms. And that's fed with a balanced feed of some sort. To drive a dipole, it's typically driven with coax. The coax could be 52 ohm or 75 ohm. The impedance of a dipole is very close to 72 ohms. So either one will work. And it doesn't need any wide range antenna tuner. The typical 3-to-1 touch-up type tuners that are built into most modern rigs these days can easily match the antenna. So that's one of the advantages of a resonant dipole single band. You don't need a wide range antenna tuner for it. You could drive it directly from the rig. The doublet typically needs a wide range antenna tuner. So you have open wire line or ladder line between the doublet and the antenna tuner. And then the input to the antenna tuner is coax, which goes to your radio. And this definitely needs a wide range antenna tuner with a balanced output. Here's another somewhat of an eye chart. I tried to show here what happens when you take a dipole and look at its elevation pattern and azimuth patterns as a function of height. If you start off with a quarter wave, in azimuth, this blue circle here looks almost circular. It has a slight bit of directivity, but not much. In elevation, it's a big egg-shaped elevation pattern. It's good for on 80 meters for a NVIS type pattern, near vertical incident skywave, that are good for stations within a couple of 100 miles of you. When you go up to half wave, now we're talking. In azimuth, the pattern becomes an hourglass, and you have some rejection off the side, and you have some gain broadside to the antenna. The bluish line in elevation shows the elevation pattern. It's a very nice looking pattern. It has a nice elevation angle, and it's a good all-around general purpose antenna. When you get up to 3/4 of a wavelength, now the azimuth pattern looks like a deeper hourglass. The off axis is narrower, and now the elevation angle gets a little lower. It goes from the blue shape to the green shape, but you start getting a little extra side lobes in there. You have a little vertical lobe, as you could see. At one wavelength, the hourglass gets even shallower, and you have a nice low angle for DX work, but now you have two big lobes in elevation. So that's what happens if you keep using the same fixed dipole antenna, which is resonant on the lowest frequency band. You get more and more side lobes, which are not usually helpful. Expanding to multiband, the advantages of this are it maintains a wide bandwidth of a standard dipole. It's actually trying to use more than one dipole fed at the center. It has broadside radiation on all bands. It eliminates any problems with wide range antenna tuners. Sometimes they need transformers, balance, loss in the feed due to high VISWA, etc. So they're very nice in that regard. For people that like to use diplexes or triplexes for field day use, where you're sharing an antenna among multiple radios, this type of antenna is amenable to a diplexer or triplexer. Could be a flat top or inverted V style. There's some other approaches which I'll talk about, which are kind of interesting to me. Here's a little trick for all of you. Let's say you have a 40-meter dipole, and I'm sure many of you tried using it on 15 meters, and it doesn't work all that well, because if you have it tuned properly on 40 meters, the resonance on 15 meters will be way up at the end of the band. If you tune it for a 15-meter operation, now the resonant frequency on 40 meters will be much too low, and that's due to end effect. End effect is never really explained by anybody, but what happens is a dipole has high current at the center and low voltage, but at the ends it has high voltage and low current. Well, the high voltage couples into the ground more easily, so you start getting higher and higher antenna currents as you get towards the ends of the antenna because they couple into the ground more. That's basically end effect in a nutshell. Well, there's a simple way to get a good resonant frequency on both 40 meters and 15 meters. What you do is you can cut the resonance where you want for 40 meters. Then you can cut some 2-foot length pieces of stiff wire, such as number 12 and number 14, and solder them together to form loops. Twist the loops in the middle to form figure eights, and solder those wires about a third of the way on the 40-meter antenna. These act like little capacitive hats, and you could play around with these and make them bigger or smaller to move the resonant frequency around that's on 15 meters. So that's a really nifty way to have a single wire antenna with a low VSWR on both 40 and 15 at the same time. Now this is a really nice antenna. This is one of my favorite antennas. It's called the folded skeleton sleeve antenna, and it was developed by Joel Hallis. I think he got the idea from someone else. But it's an antenna which will operate on any two bands with low visual. It's essentially, or a picture here shows one for 40 and 20 meters, and it's basically a piece of ladder line with two little notches taken out of it. The ladder line is bent around and comes back over on the top on each side for the 40-meter section. And then there's a small coupled radiator for 20 meters. There's no physical electrical attachment. It just couples in from the 40-meter section. And you have your standard ferrite bead choke to keep RF off of the coax feed. This has a low visual on two bands. It's amenable to a diplexer for field day use. 50 ohm coax feed. And I came up with a little twist on this one. That trick I talked about on the 15, making a 40-meter antenna work on 15 meters, you could do the same thing here. Just take the lower section of the ladder line, go about a third of the way in, add these little figure eight loops, and now you have a tri-band antenna that'll work on 40, 20, and 15. This, by the way, has more gain than a standard dipole. It has about a 1.5 dB gain over a dipole on 20 meters. And I simulated this in EasyNet, and it works in simulation as well as in reality. Okay, now here's a fan dipole. That's another approach for getting multiple bands, all with low VSWR, all radiating in the same direction. The problem with the fan dipole is it has a bad rap for interaction between the different elements, which is somewhat true. However, Stanford Research Institute found that if you take the wires at the center feed and separate them at least 5.5 inches vertically, and separate the ends of all the other sections by 38 inches, it will work in the 2 to 18 megahertz range with no interactions. This website, Ham Universe, tells you how to construct a multi-band fan dipole with more than 3 bands. It's a little mechanically clumsy, but it's a very good performing antenna with low visual on multiple bands and all radiation in the same direction. So if you get past the mechanical complexities of it, it does actually make a very nice antenna. Next, I came across this from an antenna compendium put out by the ARRL. It's a fan dipole, but it's an inverted V fan dipole that goes from 40 through 10 meters. And this figure had some dimensions on various spacing of everything. But this could be put up by one person for a field day type antenna. And it's easy to raise up by one person. It performs well. And it's easy to deploy and take down. So it's a nice antenna. It's a little bit complex to build, but it works well. Okay, let's talk about the doublet antenna now. Doublets, as I said before, you feed it with a ladder line, which could be 300 to 600 ohms, or open wire line, which is more immune to rain. Rain doesn't affect its visual, but you need a wide range antenna tuner for it, a balanced antenna tuner. Okay, why is a doublet such a nice antenna compared to other multi-band wire antennas? Well, it's very simple, low cost, and it's nice when you're using it with one rig. You can change bands all over the place very easily by just changing the antenna tuner match. It has low feed line losses compared to coax feeds with high viswar, like you have with the doublet, the dipole rather. The balanced feed line doesn't radiate, so the antenna pattern stays more symmetrical. It has no interactions between many bands, which could occur with other antennas, such as the fan dipole. And the beauty of it is there's no lossy transformers. Many other type antennas, like the end-fed half-wave, tend to have lossy transformers. You can get low loss, but you have to work at it. But on 15 and 10, they tend to be pretty lossy. OCFD can be a little better in that regard because it uses transmission line antennas. But this has no transformers, so you don't lose efficiency due to transformers. There's two different types of doublets, which I'll talk about. One of them, the radiation could be in the same direction across 4 bands. The disadvantages are you do need the wide range antenna tuner, balanced antenna tuner. You can't use it with a triplexer. The feed line hangs in the middle, which could be inconvenient for some installations. You need 2 end supports rather than 1. And conventional ladder line is sensitive to rain. It varies the viswar, and you could have up to a 1 dB loss. And it ages pretty quickly also. Okay, now let's talk about different types of doublets. And here's where there is not that much knowledge in this area, so this is good stuff. The dipole doublet is the antenna you're probably most familiar with. The length is selected to be a half wave on the lowest frequency of operation. The chief advantage is simplicity and the ability to cover all the high frequency bands above the half wave of the lowest band. A disadvantage, though, is as you go up in band, when you hit more than 1.25 wavelengths, the radiation is no longer broadside to the wire, and you get multiple lobes and more lobes as you go up in bands. It's usually fed with a balanced line driven by a wide-range balanced antenna tuner, or a single-ended tuner with a balun to turn it into a balanced tuner. This kind of eye chart, what I'm trying to show here is the radiation pattern for a dipole type doublet is not where you think it is. Like, let's take an 80-meter dipole and you're operating it on 20 meters. So you'll get in azimuth 4 lobes. Guess what? The 4 lobes are off to one side. They're like almost at 45 degrees from the width of the antenna. And guess what? The direction you think the antenna is radiating in, there's no radiation at all. Radiation is going off to 4 sides. So that was kind of a revelation to me when I looked at some of this stuff. However, having a real lot of lobes may not be a disadvantage. When you're operating in a contest such as field day, if you're not transmitting in one direction, like an old timer once told me, you're transmitting in another direction. You'll probably work some other people in that direction. So unless it's important to you to have the major radiation in one direction, a multi-lobe antenna still works pretty decently. But that's the limitation of a dipole type doublet used on multiple bands. Now there's another antenna which is less well known called the broadside doublet. That's what CBIC calls it. In this case, the length is actually determined by the highest band you want to operate on, and it's set to 1 1/4 wavelengths on that band. It's actually an extended double ZEP antenna. It's a doublet with a 1.25 wavelength length on the highest band. The lowest band is set to 4 times lower than the highest band. It's approximately 33% shorter than a full-length dipole. It doesn't have too much loss in gain compared to a full dipole at the lowest band. The low end is limited by low impedance and high capacitive reactance, so it starts getting difficult to match beyond the 4-to-1 frequency range at the low end. Even the 4-to-1 range, it's kind of a little bit marginal and a little bit inefficient at the low end. But the good news is radiation is always in the same direction on all 4 bands, and off broadside rejection is in the same direction on all 4 bands. This is what the azimuth pattern looks like for a 44-foot broadside doublet for 40 to 10 meter operation. As you can see, the radiation is all in the same direction. You do start getting these little ears on the highest band, and if you try to go above the highest band, you'll get more and more of these ears and additional lobes. But where you want all the radiation in the same direction, this is a great antenna for that. Okay, well, I wanted to just comment on 2 sort of rules of thumb. LB Seebeck says that mount it as high as it is wide for good gain and a good elevation angle. The lower the antenna is as a fraction of a wavelength, the lower will be the overall gain, and the higher the elevation angle of radiation. Another nice rule of thumb, which I got from W8JI, if you want a dipole doublet to be efficient, you want the minimum length to be 1 1/4 times the band in meters. So for example, let's say you have an 80-meter doublet. If you take 80 and multiply it by 1 1/4, you get 100 feet long. So on 80 meters, 100-foot long doublet is very efficient. In fact, I've done simulations on the ZS6BKW doublet, which is sort of an optimized G5RV. It's only 96 feet long or so, which is an advantage. But it's not that 100 feet, so it will be not very efficient on 80 meters. In fact, I simulated it in SimNet, and you have something like a 6 dB loss on 80 meters. It'll still work fine. And on 80 meters, loss is not a problem, so you wouldn't even notice it, but it does lose some efficiency. I just put together here a set of notional antennas that could work really well for field day, for known directionality, good antenna patterns, and minimizing co-channel interference for antennas that are pretty close to each other. You put up one 88-foot doublet for bands 80 through 20, at least 70 feet high, and a 44-foot doublet for bands 40 through 10, at least 35 feet high. And these are great in that all the radiation is in the same direction. They have high gain, and they have minimal interaction between the 2 antennas. In addition, you have a bonus using the balanced feed line for them, because those minimize pickup from nearby transmitters and antennas. We've had issues with overloading adjacent radios due to feed line pickup on the coax. The balanced lines really help minimizing that type of interference. They do need wide range antenna tuners, so that's the trade-off. Okay, next slide. People might be wondering, well, what about an inverted V? How about that? Or what about an off-center fed dipole? Or what about an end-fed half wave? Or the infamous or famous ZS6 BKW antenna. So let me try to give you a flavor for some of these. The inverted V is very similar to a dipole. It will have a single mounting point, which is a big advantage, especially for like portable and field day applications. It has a little less gain, but it's a bit more omnidirectional than a horizontal wire. So that's the trade-off, but it works well. It's a very good antenna, very popular. In fact, you could put two of these at right angles to each other at different bands and have two frequencies or multiple frequencies using a single mast. Well, center-fed dipole, I know quite a bit about those. I have two of them here in my backyard. It requires a matching transformer. The best type of matching transformer is known as a 4-to-1 hybrid balun. It's a 4-to-1 Ruth-Roth transformer cascaded with a 1-to-1 Guanella transformer for high common mode rejection. These are very efficient transformers compared to the end-fed half-wave because they're transmission line transformers. There are many modern designs that work well on all the normal bands, not the walk bands, including 15 meters, if you have the right point where you drive the off-center fed dipole. I like one made by Vibraplex. It's called the Spider Beam Aerial 51. I know the designer of that antenna, Rick Westerman, DJ 0IP. He designed that antenna, and he knows more about offset fender dipoles than anyone I know, and this works really well. End-fed half-wave, that's a very convenient antenna for mounting because you could mount it horizontally as a sloper, as an inverted V. The matching transformer has to be carefully designed to get low loss. Typical ones have quite a bit of loss, 1.5 to 3 dB of loss for many of them. You can get down to half a dB of loss. They're most lossy at the high end of 10 meters. 15 and 10 tend to be more lossy. I would recommend my antennas in the States. There's other good end-fed half-wave vendors in England. And the ZS6 BKW antenna. It's a great antenna, being inexpensive. It's compact. It's only 93.6 feet long. It works by using a 450 ohm line matching section and a common mode choke at the bottom. It needs only a touch-up tuner on 40, 20, 17, 12, and 10 and 6. It can be used on 80 and 15 with a wide range antenna tuner, but let me tell you this, 80 is just barely okay. You'll get about a 6 dB loss based on a simulation I did on 80, which is not all that important. 15 works very poorly. Yes, you can match it with a wide range antenna tuner, but you'll get over 10 dB loss in the whole system. So I would not recommend trying to use those on 15, even though you can match it with a wide range antenna tuner. And you want to stick with the height requirements that I talked about earlier. Okay, feed line lengths for a doublet. Let's say you have a balanced feed line and you're trying to figure out how long it should be. The recommendation is make it an odd multiple of 1/8 wavelength. You can run into problems if it turns out to be a quarter wave because it acts as an impedance transformer. If the impedance is high at one end, it'll end up being very low at the other end, or low on one end, it'll transform it to a high. So to minimize these wild changes in impedance, you can minimize those by using an odd 1/8 wave multiples. That's electrical length. So the length would be 120 divided by frequency in megahertz times its velocity factor. It'll be shorter because of the velocity factor. More information on choosing the length is available at hamuniverse.com. Just for grins, I tried simulating a 132-foot resonant doublet, 65 feet high, with 450 ohm ladder line, using the odd 1/8 wave formula for the feed line length, which came out to 95.9 feet. And I simulated feeding it with an ideal antenna tuner so that the visual is as good as it could possibly be on all the bands. And when I did that, you could see this sort of pink curve up at the top. Well, you only have a total loss of less than half a dB. So it works really well. I think it was 0.1 dB to something. I'm getting blocked over here by an overlay. But it's less than half a dB or so over the entire range. So it's very efficient. Now this is a technique for using tuned feed lines to optimize visuals on multiple ham bands. This was the ZB6 BKW antenna, and I talked about that already. It's a doublet with a matching ladder line and a one-to-one current balance. For these to work well, the length has to be very accurate, and the current balance has to have a really good common mode rejection. If this is off a little bit, everything gets out of kilter. So it works well. A lot of people use it and they're very happy with it. And you don't need any exotic transformers, especially if you're trying to run in high power. Now I've done some experimenting myself with tuned feed-aligned doublets. I played with this in SimNeck. SimNeck allows you to change feed line lengths and instantaneously look at the effect on visuals. And I found that if I made a doublet that happened to be 41.4 feet long and less than 50 feet of feed line, you can get a low visual on 30, 20, 15, and 10. In fact, if this 300 ohm ladder line, I bought a 100-foot roll so you could make 2 feed lines out of it. If you and a friend both want to build one of these, it works extremely well for low visual on those bands. The disadvantage is it's somewhat lossy. I'm not happy with the lossiness of it, but you can live with that. It's much better than many other antennas, and it does give you multi-band use on 4 bands with radiation in the same direction. Low visual and radiation in the same direction. Okay, we're almost done. Let's talk about antenna tuners. A balanced antenna tuner is a complex subject, according to Owen Duffy. You have to worry about different parameters to prevent the thing from getting damaged. What he recommends is using a run-of-the-mill unbalanced T-match type tuner followed by a 1-to-1 guanella balun in an external non-conductive enclosure with a very short coax between the ATU and the choke balun. And that'll work very well as a balanced antenna tuner. There's a very good article that was written by Joel Hallis in the 2004 issue of QST magazine. It gives a very good overview on different types of antenna tuners and relative efficiencies. Owen Duffy also has stuff on his blog on balanced ATUs and common mode current. And if you want to know more about balance, on karinya.net, there's a lot of information on balance. Okay, now this question comes up quite often. Well, let's say I have a unmatched antenna tuner, like a T-tuner. Should the balun be on the input side or the output side? And the opinion on this has changed over the years. But either one can work, and they have the pros and cons. If you put the T-tuner on the input side of the balun, then the ATU has pretty low losses, but the balun is stressed because you have a very wide range of impedances on the doublet, on the different bands. The impedances go all over the place. So the balun will see very high voltages. This typically has to be what's called a tuner balun, which is a twisted pair type balun. And some antenna tuners come with a 4-to-1 balun built in. The recommendation is to use a 1-to-1 balun, not a 4-to-1 balun. And I'll explain why on the next slide. But this stresses the balun in some cases on certain bands with high voltage. But it gives you the best balance. If you put the tuner on the output side, then the balun sees a nice viswar going into the tuner. So the balun has very little stress on it. However, the tuner is not very balanced going to the balanced line. It's sitting in a metal box usually. You have imbalances to ground, etc. So the balance on the balanced line is not going to be as good as the balun on the output. However, the balun will be really happy over here because it won't see high stresses. So take your pick. Most of the experts that I've read articles about recommended putting the balun after the tuner. That's the latest thinking. Now, 1-to-1 balun or 4-to-1 balun, what's better? And like I said, a lot of antenna tuners come with a 4-to-1 balun built in. Well, Owen Duffy and Steve Hunt have written extensively on this. And the problem is, you could figure out what the range of impedances is going to be on a multi-band doublet. And it typically has what's called a geometric mean of 450 ohms. If you put a 4-to-1 balun in there, the geometric mean reduces to 112 ohms. Also, a 1-to-1 current balun only needs a single transformer. A properly working 4-to-1 balun, current balun, requires 2 transformer cores. Everything else doesn't work, trust me. But if you look at the range of tuner losses with a 4-to-1 balun versus a 1-to-1 balun, the tuner losses are much lower with a 1-to-1 balun over the full range of frequencies that the doublet would work under. So the 1-to-1 is recommended there. Of course, nothing beats a good beam. I like this little cartoon. And then the last slides are resources. Various articles by Seebeck, Walter Stanton, various other people on some details about some of these antennas. And if you are interested in any other antenna presentations, I have put together presentations on the off-center fed dipole and the end-fed half-wave antenna. So you could look at those at our local radio club's website, K1RF.org. I left a link there for it. And that's the story. If anyone has any questions, please ask.
Thank you very much, Steve. A real comprehensive overview of those two antennas. So if you've been watching this at home now live on Wednesday and you'd like to ask a question or got any comments or maybe share experiences of antennas that you've got with Steve, then please do it now on either BATC or on Facebook Live and we'll relay them to Steve. Steve, I'm going to ask you a difficult question, but I always ask there's two questions I'm going to ask to experts on antennas. Overall, if you were on that mythical desert island and you could only take one antenna, what do you think is the best all-rounder?
Um, you'd want something that you could put up relatively easily. I would say if you could put it up as an inverted V, the off-center fed dipole, it has the lowest losses, very good antenna patterns. If you want some more flexibility where it's important to feed it on one end, the end-fed half-wave antenna would be good for that. So I'd use one of those two. There's another antenna which I didn't talk about, which actually I think there's some folks in England that sell them or have written articles about them. There's something called the end-connected off-center fed dipole. It's sort of a off-center fed dipole, but instead of the feed line coming off the middle someplace, it can be fed at one end. It has a Ruthroff antenna in the middle of it, where the normal off-center fed dipole would feed it, and you have a piece of coax feeding that. The outside of the coax acts as one arm of the off-center fed dipole, and then you feed that with a common mode choke. And it's not very well known, and I think I talked about it in my OCFD presentation. But I'd say for most commonly used antennas, either the off-center fed dipole or the end-fed half-wave, to give you simplicity and ease of mounting for pretty much for both of them. If you use the off-center fed dipole with a inverted V configuration, or the end-fed, you have a million different configurations you could use. So that would be my recommendation.
Thank you. Yeah. I'm certainly no expert and haven't even got much experience of them, but I have got here an end-fed half-wave, which a good friend of ours at the club, Steve Nichols, G0KYA, you may have heard of Steve, big in antennas and propagation circles. But I had an event that I wanted to set up here, a special event, and I asked him, very in a short time and an easy, what could I put up that would work simply and just easily? And he said an end-fed half-wave, and I bought one of the My Antennas ones from over there in the US, and I must admit, as an overall antenna, it's great, and it never gives me any hassle or anything, and it's easy to maintain, and I'm not worried about it, in high winds and everything. So,
Right.
but I'm sure everybody has got their own views, I'm sure, on the best antennas.
Yeah, I use an inverted V end-fed half-wave here, and I use a sort of an inverted L on 80 meters, and I'm active in the CW group called CW Ops. They have a weekly CW contest, and I typically end up coming in the top 10 and 20% for the low power class. So I'm at a reasonable elevation, not very high, but not very low either. And they work very, very well.
Yeah, they are good.
It's going to be a nice antenna.
If anybody's got anything I'd like to share, Rick M7GMT has said, great to see LB Seebeck being quoted so heavily because he was the greatest of all time. That's what he says there. You have referred to him a lot tonight, haven't you?
Yeah, there's a website where you can access all of his writings. And there's still a lot of information out there on the web. Even though he hasn't been around for a while, his information lives on.
Steve, do you think that there's, again, this is my second question that I often ask antenna experts, do you think there's still new types of antennas that are yet to be discovered? Have we got mainly really all the variations there can be, or do you have a feeling that there's something else yet to be, developed and discovered to help us in this hobby?
Well, I think a lot of stuff has been pretty well covered. You can play games with making phased arrays of different types. So people might come up with the new phased array type antenna. The four square antenna works well if you have the room. The The loop antenna works well if you have the room. Myself and Rick Westerman from the OCFD group, we've played around with different configurations of off-center fed dipoles. You can make one with, it's sort of an inverted L on one half, and then a horizontal wire near the ground, like 6 feet off the ground for the shorter half. And that will work, and it takes up less space than a full-length off-center fed dipole. So for an antenna that's multi-band and takes up less space and is efficient, that will work very well. I simulated it. Neither one of us built it yet, but it works very well in simulations. But yeah, people will come up with, I think, what I would call variations on existing antennas.
Yeah. Like most things, it seems like in life now, they're mainly variations on established and existing things, aren't they? But it's fascinating to get your take on it. Thank you ever so much for tonight's presentation, Steve.
My pleasure.
It's really given a lot of people, an insight into antennas. There are several I noticed who've signed in M7s, which in the UK are newcomers to the hobby, relative newcomers. So hopefully it's helped them, because it is a difficult decision. What antennas are best. That's always the classic question, but there's no easy answer, is there? So thank you very much for sharing all this tonight.
And I'll just say, if anyone has further questions, you could email me at K1RF@ARRL.net.
Oh, okay, that's an easy one to remember. K1RF@ARRL.net.
And Dave, you have a copy of the presentation, so if anyone
I do.
would like a hard copy, I guess you could get it to them?
Yes, because I've got actually all the links as well that are on the last page, which will make more sense to have those to be able to click onto. So yeah, good point, Steve. If anybody wants that, a copy of the presentation, if you're happy for that, and especially the last 2 pages with the links, then I'll be happy to send them to them. Just drop me an email in that case if you want to.
Okay, shall I stop sharing here?
Yeah, that's fine. But
okay.
I think we've come to the end of our time now. I haven't got any other questions, I don't think. No, on there. So thank you once again, Steve, very much. Steve K1RF.
My pleasure.
Take care. Thank you.
You're welcome.
There we are. That concludes Steve's presentation, and is just about the end of NARC Live for this week. Just to go over what's happening in the club this week. On Saturday at 10 o'clock, the Cablen's Sked on 7.123 megahertz with a local talking on 145.250. On Sunday at 7 p.m, the GB2RS News on GB3NB, and at 7:30 also on GB3NB, it's the Monday Night Net, followed by the CW Net at 8 p.m. on 3.543 megahertz. And then next Wednesday, we're not meeting online, we're meeting in person at the CNS School between 7 and 9:30 for a tabletop sale. Great opportunity to get rid of stuff or maybe buy some more stuff, you never know. I know which you prefer me to do. But that's it for Norfolk Amateur Radio Club Live, NARC Live this week. Until the next time we meet in 2 weeks' time, from Tammy M0TC.
Bye-bye.
And from me, David G7ERP. Take care of yourselves, look after each other. Bye-bye.